So I'd like to welcome everybody to this wonderfully collaborative CLE between the Hinda Institute and the Decalogue Society. In the room, we're going to have families impacted by the criminal justice system, and we're going to also have lawyers with years of experience. And it's really an opportunity for us to learn, speak together, and communicate and learn from experts in the field. This is a safe, brave, confidential space. I just want to remind everybody. And I also want to thank our panelists for their time and generosity. We have here Professor Mark Buselick, or Commander Mark Buselick, because he's a retired police commander from the Chicago Police Department. And he also teaches criminology at the University of Illinois, where his research interests are in police accountability and community. Accompanying him is Sergeant Chris Rodriguez, who is responsible for the Crisis Intervention Unit, the police department, the Chicago PD Crisis Intervention Unit. And we have also Ms. Kyle Lappin, who is a supervising attorney in the Cook County Public Defender's Office, and she oversees the Felony Trial Division's problem solving and diversion courts, and emphasizes defense strategy that promotes alternatives to incarceration and tries to address behavioral health needs. And lastly, we have Mr. Mark Epstein, who is attorney at the law firm of Epstein and Epstein, which focuses on health law, guardianship, and elder law. And he was an adjunct professor at Northwestern Law School and has won national endowments for his work in mental health. And you could learn more about our speakers on our website, where you could see full bios. Carlene, do you mind pulling up the PowerPoint? We can go to the next slide. This is the title, The Criminalization of Mental Health. I just want to take a second and talk about the Hinda Institute. We've been around 45 years in the Chicago area in Illinois, and our mission is to empower families affected by institutionalization, the criminal justice system, trauma, and crisis. Essentially, we are the Jewish prison chaplains of Illinois, state, federal, and many jails and mental health institutions. We also have a really comprehensive reentry program, and we also help families and children that we call the innocent collateral damage of crime. Currently, we have, in 2024, we had 440 clients, and 80% of our reentry clients had mental health challenges, but only 50% had managed to secure licensed providers due to Medicaid rates, ostracism, and other problems with resources. And so we are a critical point of access for our clients and a critical point of support for mental health services in a diverse Jewish community. If you could change slides, Carlene. So what we're going to do today is we're going to identify strategies together to assist people who have mental health challenges, substance abuse disorders, who are caught up in the legal system. Each of our panelists are going to speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions and discussions. Next slide, Carlene. And I think the place we need to start is the cycle with the problem, because our panelist is going to talk about solutions. And that problem starts with disorderly conduct. There's a large percentage of people hitting Cook County Court with misdemeanors, about 30%, statistics are showing, but some of them also are coming in with felonies. And they're coming in because of their unmet mental health needs. And Mr. Epstein is going to speak a little bit about ways that maybe we could divert them entirely from the criminal health system, the criminal justice system. Next, we're going to look, the police might be called, and the police arrive. 71% of people with mental health issues encounter the criminal justice system. And the first ones on the scene are the police, and they have to make some decisions. Some of those decisions might be diversions, but sometimes they need to think about hospitals, which are really a revolving door for mental health because of codes on mental health. Or sometimes they are going to think about Cook County Jail. And Sheriff Tom Dart calls Cook County Jail the largest mental health institution in Illinois, and certainly competitive for all of the US. He says 40% of mental health issues. At HINDA, we say about 80% of mental health issues. And there aren't that many choices for the police because in the 80s, a lot of mental health institutions were closed. And that left people with, we have about 1,800 now beds in mental health institutions. And that's insufficient. So once they're in jail, the next step is we're going to speak with Ms. Lappin because they end up in court. And it's hard for people with mental health challenges to be in court. They have challenges in court due to their mental health needs. And sometimes they have difficulty meeting the conditions that the court wants to put on. And Ms. Lappin is going to discuss that. And finally, they're released either from prison, either from IDOC. IDOC has been sued, by the way, multiple times for its mental health processes, and they've lost badly, but they have not made the changes that have been required by the court. And so people are eventually released. And sometimes they need good exit strategies. And Ms. Lappin is also going to speak to that. Because without exit strategies, we have the same cycle, and the cycle repeats itself. Could you switch slides, please? So we're going to start with with Mr. Epstein, who's going to talk now about the first stage in the cycle. And we're going to ask the question, how do we keep our family member from, in fact, encountering the criminal justice system? So I'd like us to, Carlene, can you close the slide because Mr. Epstein is going to speak to the audience.
Okay, am I on?
You're on.
Okay. Good evening. I want to extend my sincere thanks to the HINDA Institute and to the Decalogue Society for inviting me to speak with you today. My name is Mark Epstein from the law firm of Epstein & Epstein, where we focus on adult guardianship and mental health law. The topic for today's session is the criminalization of mental health and the very real possibilities for healing and breaking that cycle. My specific focus is on deflection, the crucial strategies that we can use to help individuals in crisis avoid entering the criminal justice system in the first place. To understand what we're up against, let me share a typical story, a situation a family might bring to my office. So my son is in his 20s. He's smart and he did fine in high school. But when he went to college, strange behaviors started. He saw things that weren't there, heard voices, became paranoid, believing everyone was against him. He wasn't sleeping or eating right, convinced his food was being poisoned. We felt lucky when we found a good psychiatrist. The medication worked. My son stabilized, he went back to school, and he reconnected with us and his friends, and he was doing okay. But then about 9 or 10 months ago, he decided he was fine and didn't need the medication anymore. He stopped everything, and it all went downhill. All the old symptoms came back, but this time they came back even worse. Last week, I was making him some breakfast, some scrambled eggs, which he usually likes. But he became convinced that I put something evil in them. He cornered me in the kitchen, got up in my face and threatened me. And then he gave this long, hard look at an open kitchen drawer filled with large knives. I was terrified. I was able to run around him and ran to my bedroom and locked the door. I called 911. I begged them to take him to the hospital. But by the time the police arrived, he had calmed down and he was able to talk his way out of it. They left. Now I'm scared for myself, but even more, I'm scared for him. What can I do? This mother's question, what can I do, is the central challenge. A major reason these situations are so difficult is a clinical condition called anosognosia. In simple terms, anosognosia means a person's illness prevents them from having any insight that they have an illness. Their delusions and paranoia feel completely real. They aren't being stubborn. Their brain is telling them that they are the only ones seeing things clearly. You can't reason someone out of a belief that their own brain chemistry is cementing as reality. So when a person can't see they are ill, how do we help them? What tools are in our toolbox to deflect them from a path that could lead to arrest and incarceration? I'm going to walk through several key options available right here in Illinois. What is our deflection toolbox? First, there's the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. The first tool is 988. This national hotline is for anyone experiencing mental health crisis or for someone seeking help for a person in crisis. If the situation is not yet physically dangerous, this is a less invasive first step. Trained counselors can provide immediate support, de-escalate the situation over the phone, and connect you to local resources. It's about getting the right help, not necessarily the fastest help. The second tool is what I call the smarter 911 call. If you must call 911 because there is a risk of harm, you can make a more strategic call. When you speak to the dispatcher, specifically request a CIT officer. CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Team. These are officers who have received specialized training to recognize and respond to mental health crises. They are taught de-escalation techniques that prioritize getting the person to a healthcare facility, not to a jail cell. They are a world away from a standard response. The third tool is an order of detention and examination. This is a powerful tool for when a loved one will not go for help voluntarily. It's sometimes called a writ, and here's how it works. You can go to the state's attorney's office, specifically their behavioral health unit, and on my screen behind me is the Daly Center, and on the 27th floor is the central office of that behavioral unit at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. There are also state's attorneys who do this in the outlying districts as well, but the main office is on the 27th floor of the Daly Center. So you can go to the state's attorney's office, and this is Monday through Friday, opening starting around 9 o'clock. You can go to the state's attorney's office, specifically their behavioral health unit. There you provide evidence that your loved one is at serious risk of harming himself or others, or is unable to care for their basic needs due to their illness. The state's attorney can help you prepare an emergency petition for a judge, and in many cases, this can all happen in a single day. The judge, if the judge is persuaded, can then issue an order compelling the local police to transport your loved one to a hospital for a behavioral health examination. Once there, your loved one can be held for up to 24 hours for evaluation. This process can be a lifeline for families who have run out of other options. The next tool in the toolbox is guardianship, and particularly guardianship to break down barriers. So let's say your loved one is now in the hospital. You're relieved, but now you hit a new wall. Because of patient confidentiality laws, the hospital staff tells you, we can't give you any information or speak with the treatment team without your son's consent. And because of his paranoia, he refuses. This is where adult guardianship comes in. You can file an emergency petition in court asking to be appointed temporary guardian with the specific authority to communicate with the treatment team. If successful, you can participate in creating a safe and effective discharge plan, ensuring the family is not shut out of the healing process. Now, this is where things can get complicated. Typically, the court process for hospitalization is completely separate from the process for guardianship. They involve different courtrooms, different lawyers, and different judges. Navigating both simultaneously is a significant challenge for families in crisis. However, I may have some good news. Just this year in Cook County, a pilot project called Calendar 20 was launched. Under certain circumstances, this program allows these two separate legal processes to be joined in front of a single judge. This could potentially combine the request for hospitalization and the request for guardianship into a single streamlined proceeding.
Oh.
Though still finally, let's imagine the best case scenario. Your loved one receives treatment, stabilizes, and regains insight into their illness. This is the crucial window of opportunity to plan for the future and break the cycle for good. This is done through advanced directives. These are legal documents your loved one signs while they are well, giving a trusted person the authority to make decisions for them if a crisis happens again. They are saying, in effect, I know I might lose my balance again. When my judgment is impaired, I want my mother, father, friend to step in and ensure I get the care I need. The two key documents here are the healthcare power of attorney and the Declaration for Mental Health Treatment. These documents can make the entire process infinitely easier the next time, deflecting a crisis before it even begins. So to conclude, the mother who called my office, terrified and feeling helpless, she felt alone, but she was not without options. Deflection is not a single action, but a series of them, from making a better phone call with 988 or 911, to using the courts to compel treatment and ensure family involvement, to proactively planning for the future. These tools allow us to offer treatment instead of punishment, compassion instead of condemnation. They are keys to breaking the cycle and turning a story of fear into one of healing. Thank you.
Arlene, could you pull up the PowerPoint? So here we see summarized some of our options for deflection, and everybody will get the PowerPoint. We're going to look now at the next step in the cycle, which is the police have been called. Carlene, can you switch slides? And we're going to hear from Commander Buslick and Sergeant Rodriguez about what can police do to keep people with mental health, substance abuse, and housing challenges, homelessness out of the criminal justice system. So Mark, would you like us to take the slide down, or would you like it up?
Keep it up, and that way we can kind of follow along.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, my name is Mark Buslick. I am a retired commander from the Chicago Police Department. I will tell you that I am back working for the police department full-time in a civilian capacity. At our training division, I was asked to come back and work on consent decree issues, federal court consent decree, in part because I had been the police department's liaison to the U.S. Department of Justice during DOJ's civil rights investigation of the police department. So intimately familiar with this process. I found myself gaining considerable experience about the mental health system and policing back in 2016 when I became the district commander of the town hall district. As I explained to my civilian friends, that's the 9 square miles around Wrigley Field. And that is inclusive of the majority of Uptown. You're probably somewhat familiar with the history of Uptown and how it relates to the mentally ill and those in crisis here in Chicago, that it became kind of the center in the city for people with mental health issues and who wound up being in crisis. I was very fortunate that I had a police officer working for me. She's now a sergeant, who, while in graduate school, had done a fair amount of research in how the police respond to those with mental health issues and those people in crisis. And developed a model for the police responding and dealing with people in crisis. Eventually, this became what's known as a mental health resource officer, or MHRO, and we implemented that in the 19th district. What we discovered in analyzing calls for service and in talking with resources, hospitals, as well as the few clinics that existed, that the police were dealing with people repeatedly, the same people, who found themselves in crisis or were chronically mentally ill and lacked a support system. Their family wasn't involved, or they avoided family. They did not have a good relationship with healthcare facilities. The things that we all consider important when someone's not well, whether it's physical or mentally. And the problem was then the police would engage and interact with people in crisis multiple times, some repeatedly. And we started to work on providing support services. The police have often been accused, or it's said that we are not social workers. You're absolutely right. The police are not social workers. But the police are about public safety. And that means taking care of people in crisis, as well as people around them, people who interact with them, as well as our own officers. So we knew that we needed to provide services so that we didn't keep encountering and engaging with people who demanded services that we may or may not have been able to provide. Now, Mr. Epstein had mentioned the CIT program. The CIT program, which Chicago Police Department is heavily invested in, began with the Memphis Police Department a little more than 20 years ago. It is now a national model, which Chicago has been involved in, almost 20 years now. From the first time I was trained as a police captain. The crisis intervention team model recognizes that the police are going to encounter people in crisis, and that we have an opportunity to, in some cases, provide deflection, keep them out of the criminal legal system, or support diversion. Once they have to be within that system, because there has to be an arrest, provide support for them as they go through the system. Very quickly, the program is a 40-hour training. It involves very highly trained police officers as instructors, as well as people with lived experience to instruct the class. And my colleague, Sergeant Rodriguez, can go into greater detail. He's the expert. So we used the MHR model in the 19th district. Well, it was later expanded to be included in the federal court consent decree that we operate under now. And it now goes citywide, or I should say across the city. It's not 100% coverage, through something called the DOCS program. And that stands for District Operations and Community Support. That's part of our CIU, our Crisis Intervention Unit. And again, Sergeant Rodriguez is the expert there. He oversees what DOCS does citywide. And that extends this support out in the field when people are experiencing a crisis and need intervention. There is another option, a third option, and that is a program provided by the City of Chicago. It is not a police department program. That's called the CARE Unit, C-A-R-E. That stands for Crisis Assistance, Response, and Engagement. And that is a team of a paramedic, fire department paramedic, and a licensed clinical social worker. And they selectively respond to 911 calls for people in crisis. So what we have are 3 levels of police response, or I should say city response here in Chicago, public response. The police officers in each patrol district who are CIT trained and respond to calls of people in crisis. The DOCS teams who provide a higher level and more focused response to provide that longer term support, something beyond the immediate 911 call. That's that mental health resource officer. And then the city's care team, which we're hoping for some additional expansion. So that's how the police department engages with people in mental health crisis. We have a similar effort for those people who are unhoused and need support, as well as substance use disorder. Now, does it answer every question? No, because we can't respond to every possible thing because our resources are limited. But that is how the Chicago Police Department is working with the people who need help that we can facilitate, or in some cases, provide. And I say that because now Sergeant Kate Sanchez, the police officer who created the MHRO model, and I wound up responding to a call for CIT officers, both of us having been trained, and subsequently saving a young man's life who was threatening suicide due to a breakup with his girlfriend and was going to jump into Lake Michigan. This goes on every day. This is what the police department is trying to do. We all know horror stories of the police encountering and engaging and interacting with people who are in crisis, and it turns out really bad. Turns out bad for the person, turns out bad for potentially for a police officer. We need to do more in this regard. As far as diversion, once someone is in the system, the highest profile option that we have is mental health court. When we've identified someone who is entering that criminal legal system, that they are in crisis or they have a chronic mental health issue, then the court system says, okay, we have to treat this differently. And we have to be cognizant of this defendant's issues and respond to those issues. And that's what the mental health courts do. Mr. Epstein discussed the Calendar 20 court and how they've melded the guardianship issue along with the core criminal court, what they do. This is very much a step in the right direction. And again, to keep people away from interacting with the police. There's two reasons for that. One, it's not necessarily the best thing for them. And two, it frees up the police to deal with other issues. Now, we know the police only deal with about 15% of their day with law enforcement. And the rest of it is service calls for a variety of reasons. So we want the police dealing with that, the crime, the disorder that are not about someone in crisis. That's not productive. It's not satisfying the need for true public safety. And that's why we have these initiatives. That's why we've adopted programs. That's why we train police officers. And that's why we've taken steps to change the culture of policing in the city. Because we know that the old ways were not successful.
Mhm.
Responding to a call of someone creating a disturbance, finding them on the street naked, and scaring people away and refusing any help. So we take them to jail? No, that doesn't work. Doesn't work. Didn't work then, doesn't work now, and we can't do things that way. So,
Mark,
yes,
is Mr. Rodriguez also going to say something?
I'd like for him to.
Okay, because we're almost.
Oh,
moving on to
absolutely.
the
Then I
next
will stop
speaker.
talking. Yes, as Abby said, yes, I can talk for hours. So let me turn my time over to Sergeant Chris Rodriguez. Again, very quick intro. Chris is with the Crisis Intervention Unit, oversees the CIT training, as well as the DOCS responses and those teams across the city. Chris, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'll kind of touch on everything or elaborate a little more on the details that Mark touched on. Whenever I hear my name and expert next to each other, I winch a little bit. I'm not used to it. Yes, so starting with the training, the CIT training, the CIT basic course that is authorized for our department to teach through the Illinois Law Enforcement and Training Standards Boards is a 40-hour course. We encourage all officers, once they reach 18 months on the job, to apply for this and receive this training. Regardless whether they choose this path or not, all our officers, when they come through the academy, receive what we refer to as a CIT concepts course. That is a 8-hour course that involves classroom and role-playing scenarios. Going back to that 40-hour course, the whole CIT model is a collaboration between law enforcement, the community, stakeholders, and those providers. So that 40-hour course, along with the refresher that we offer to the officers that have taken the 40-hour course, are taught not only by our instructors, but by professionals from the National Alliance of Mental Illness, other licensed individuals who work in the field, whether it be recognizing co-occurring disorders, signs and symptoms, veterans issues. We have speakers that come in and help us teach these courses because they work day in and day out seeing this. Now, the very first way you can address an issue or
Chris, are you there? You froze. Oh, we have technology. Chris, are you there? Sergeant
I'm
Rodriguez?
sorry. Where did I?
Okay.
Yes, can you hear me?
You froze for a minute, sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. Recognizing, yes. So we in this training, the main objective of it is not that officers diagnose individuals, but recognize when they're dealing with somebody who might be living with a mental health condition or they're in crisis. With that, whenever officers respond to a call that involves a mental health component, they're required to document that incident. Going to our DOCS teams, our district operation and community support teams. That operates citywide. We have is broken up into three offices. Every district and every area has an officer who will review all the reports that officers generate that have a mental health component to them. Officers either look for a pattern, someone who is a repeat or a constant use of police resources, and those officers, because that is their primary task, have the ability to take the time to follow up. This is generally done via the telephone or in person if the contact information isn't reliable in terms of telephone or email. They will follow up in person. Generally, what we're dealing with are those people who frequently times have reached to the point where they meet criteria for involuntary petition, or the family fears for their safety enough that they're now calling police, and police are having to constantly go there. Our DOCS officers have the ability to read and go back and see all this person's previous documentation where officers have been called out, and they have the benefit of time to follow up with that family and really get a clear picture of what is going on. Sometimes those phone calls are 45 minutes and they are emotionally exhausting for the officer. And in hearing that, the officers can help the family member come to a conclusion, whether a referral to an organization such as NAMI or Thresholds might benefit that individual. Or if they're past that point and it's best that we refer them directly to the ASA, the State's Attorney's Office, to obtain that order for judicial admission. So the officers have that, again, that benefit of time and being on the phone. And sometimes if we are dealing with a family member who's taking care of that person in crisis or mental health condition, sometimes all they need is someone to talk to. They'll sit on the phone with their officer for 45 minutes and say, I just needed to get this off my chest. I have nobody. I'm doing this alone. And sometimes that's the only service they ask of us. And they feel like they have it from here, that this wasn't a frequent occurrence. But the docs teams play a very important role in going out, sometimes building rapport with the individual in crisis, seeing them, following up. And unfortunately, frequently we see a lot of the same names because, like Mr. Epstein mentioned, the sheriff's office is ultimately responsible per the statute for enforcing writs, but they can then delegate that down to local law enforcement, and the Chicago Police Department is responsible for that. In terms of the diversion programs, one of the other programs that our CIT unit has been responsible for educating officers on is the NADP, Narcotics Arrest Diversion Program. Less mental health related, but again, we do know that these people tend to self-medicate, or we have these co-occurring disorders, and this allows the district to release somebody from custody out in the districts without further prosecution if they agree to speak with somebody from Threshold for minor possession charges. I don't want to go on too long, but I'll kind of leave it at that if we have any questions.
I think we're going to have questions after, both for
Okay.
you, both for
Great.
Commander Buslick and Sergeant Rodriguez. I think there'll be some time to discuss further and look at some of those issues. Carlene, can you change the slide? We're now going to speak to Ms. Kyle Lappin, and she's going to talk about the next stage. What happens when somebody does get detained in Cook County Jail and has to go to court? And what kind of strategies does she use as a public defender, as someone running the public defender's office?
Thank you, Abby. So as the slide indicates, I do plan on speaking mostly about problem-solving courts and diversion courts. My hope with the information that I'm giving is that people leave here with an understanding of the landscape of these courts, who might be eligible, how someone might go about getting into one of these courtrooms. But before I go into those things, I just wanted to mention that mental health, behavioral health, these issues, excuse me, touch every single piece of someone's criminal case. And the attorney that is handling the case, whether it's a public defender or a private attorney, has to be extremely thoughtful and strategic about whether or not they want to put the mental health issue at issue in the case. These issues can touch anywhere from after someone's arrested and they're in initial appearance court, whether they want to bring that issue up as potential mitigation. It can touch potential pretrial motions. Is there a motion to suppress because someone didn't really give an officer consent to search something, or they didn't actually understand their Miranda rights, so they didn't voluntarily waive those rights when giving a self-incriminating statement. Whether or not someone's even competent to have the proceedings go forward. Are they competent to stand trial? Are they fit? If an attorney or a judge or a state's attorney has concerns, a bona fide doubt that the person isn't fit to stand trial, they don't understand the proceedings, or they aren't able to assist in their own defense, there is essentially a duty to raise that issue and have the person assessed for that. Whether or not it makes sense to raise this issue as an affirmative defense, not guilty by reason of insanity, the person didn't understand the criminality of their action. Whether they want to bring it up in a sentencing hearing as potential mitigation. So throughout the criminal case, these mental health, behavioral health issues can be brought up and can be considered and potentially used as mitigation or to steer the case in a specific direction. But they can have potential negative outcomes as well, and pitfalls. So when these issues are being brought up, whether it's to the state's attorney, to the judge, it should be a thought out strategic decision that's made by the attorney in collaboration with the client. And I do have to say that sometimes what's in someone's legal best interest does not always align with what's in their personal best interest. And so an attorney may take a strategic route with the client in the defense of their case in a way that doesn't always align with what the family thinks is maybe in the best interest of the client. So I just wanted to mention that before diving into these different diversion courts and problem-solving courts. There are many different diversion courts in Cook County. And so first, the difference between a diversion court and a problem-solving court. A diversion court is a pre-plea court. There's also a program that's not a courtroom that I'll talk about. And so those are exactly what it sounds like. The state's attorney is deferring to prosecute the case. If the defendant, the client, I don't like to use the word defendant, but the person accused of a crime agrees to do certain things, and they satisfy the conditions of that agreement, then the case is dismissed. So these are ideal because there's never a plea of guilt. There's never a finding of guilt. There's not a conviction. But I would say that this probably is more appropriate for people that have more mild mental health diagnoses or moderate, or those diagnoses are being managed, because these are not as intensive as the problem-solving courts, which I'll talk about. So these spaces include the restorative justice courts, the SEED program, the felony diversion prosecution program, which is also referred to as Branch 9, and the drug deferred prosecution program. The only rights that a person waives by participating in these programs is obviously they're not going to have a speedy trial. They're not going to have a trial within 120 or 160 days, and that the timeline depends on if they're in custody or not. And then sometimes they're asked to waive their right to a preliminary hearing, and that just depends on when this offer is being made or this concept comes up to have them participate in a diversion court. So the process is essentially the state agrees to offer this. The client is in agreement with participating in the diversion court. The case is transferred to that court call, and the agreement for that courtroom is entered. There's different agreements for each one of these court spaces that I'm speaking on. And then once, like I said, once those conditions are satisfied, the case is dismissed. Alternatively, if the conditions are not satisfied, the state just continues to prosecute the case as normal. And so all of those other ways that someone's mental health or substance use disorder could come into play, like I mentioned at the onset of talking, could still come into play. So the restorative justice courts are community courts. There's 4 that exist right now, one in Avondale, North Lawndale, Inglewood, and Sauk Village. Chief Judge Evans had plans to open 2 more, but now with the new chief judge, we'll see what's going to happen. He had wanted to open 2 more by the end of the year. Now the state of restorative justice courts is kind of up in the air. But I have hopes that who will be Chief Judge Beach is also a believer in these courts. What happens when the purpose of these courts is to repair the harm caused by the crime, to restore justice, and to empower the community. So they do this through peace circles. So the client is transferred to the restorative justice court. They are assessed by a social services officer. They participate in peace circles with a trained circle keeper. And the people that participate in those circles are the defendant, the complaining witness, the victim who was harmed by whatever happened, and then community members. So any other community members that are appropriate to be there, a pastor, well, I guess not pastor here, a rabbi, a friend, neighbor, family, support of the complaining witness, anyone that's appropriate. They discuss what happened. So the client has to be in agreement with taking accountability for what brought them into the legal criminal justice system. And And then through that process, and it's confidential, through that process, they create what's called a repair of harm agreement, which is where they agree to conditions that they will satisfy to repair the harm that was caused. That agreement is entered into court. That's essentially the contract between the person charged and the court and the state's attorney's office. And when they satisfy the conditions of those by working with the case manager, they get their case dismissed. And so oftentimes conditions can include things like treatment, counseling, and community engagement. Eligibility has to do with where people live. So you have to live in one of these communities. But like I mentioned, the hope is that these types of courts expand. These are for emerging adults, so 18 to 26-year-olds, sometimes up to age 30. The allegation has to be not violent. It can be for a felony or a misdemeanor, though I personally wouldn't recommend sending misdemeanors to this courtroom. I think more often you can get a much more lenient outcome than a court like this for a misdemeanor case. These spaces used to accept guns. Now the state's attorney's office position has changed, but the stakeholders involved are working on a pathway to bring gun cases, possessory gun offenses back into the space. And like I said, the client has to be willing to participate. Another very similar court to the restorative justice courts is a court called SEED, which stands for Supporting Education and Employment Development. And this is essentially the same concept in that the hope is to reduce harm caused by the crime by helping people gain a living wage through comprehensive services. It's a 13-month program, and I failed to mention the restorative justice court is a 6 to 12-month program usually. And then the SEED program, it's like I said, 13 months. That's because it's 1 month of orientation and then 12 months of the program. Heartland Alliance does the case management services, and similarly, people work through services of trauma-informed cognitive behavioral interventions and work toward job development and getting gainful employment. Again, this is for emerging adults, but there's no restriction with respect to the neighborhood that someone lives in. These are for allegations of drug dealing or gun possessions. The person can't have a violent background. Another space is called the Felony Deferred Prosecution Program. It's commonly referred to as Branch 9. It's essentially a 12-month pre-plea probation program. So it doesn't have the same like hand-holding case management services that the other diversion courts I mentioned had. It's essentially an agreement where people have to do certain services, be in school, maintain a job, and they show verification of that. Oftentimes these spaces involve, or this space and the agreement involves restitution, but there's no age limit to who is eligible for these spaces. And I think charges that commonly end up in these spaces make a lot of sense for the demographic that we're talking about here, because we see things in this space like theft, forgery, fraud ID, burglary, false report, vandalism, criminal damage to property. So false report, I've seen so many times where it is a symptom of someone's paranoia that causes them to make some false reports, called incessantly over and over. So that's an appropriate thing here. Or someone's being arrested, but they're triggered by that arrest, and then they end up damaging government property, damaging a police car, things like that. So, and then there's restitution that's being asked to be owed. So these are appropriate cases for this space, but the person cannot have had any other previous felony convictions. And then there's the DDPP, which is a program, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to hurry up, but that's essentially, it's a very low level program for substance use disorders. People do a level of care and one other follow-up appointment, and then the case is dismissed. That's more primarily for the substance use disorders, and it's when someone's charged with possession of a controlled substance. I think what is most applicable here are the problem-solving courts, and these are going to be courts that are appropriate for people with more severe mental health issues and symptoms. And these are people where the criminal justice system is a revolving door for them. They've been in and out of prison, and the lofty goal of these problem-solving courts is to break that cycle of incarceration. So when I'm talking to my clients about this, these courts are about changing people's lives. And so in Cook County, we have mental health court, drug treatment court, and veterans treatment court. When someone has a dual diagnosis of both the substance use disorder and mental health diagnosis, the mental health court is appropriate. If they have either one of them and they're a veteran, veterans court is more appropriate. These are post pleas. So someone is actually pleading guilty to the offense and they're put on a 2-year intensive probation. And that is what the problem solving court is. It's that oversight for that probation. The hope is to address those underlying issues that are causing the interaction with the criminal justice system. So those mental health diagnoses, the instability with that, and the substance use disorders. If it's important to keep in mind that these courtrooms have really amazing outcomes. They reduce recidivism, which increases public safety, obviously, and they more efficiently use public dollars because, believe it or not, it is less expensive to treat people than it is to have them in prison. And then ultimately it has the great effect of restoring people to their families and their communities. And the reason those things are so important is, as a defense attorney, these are tools for leverage to persuade the state's attorney, the judges, that this is an appropriate space for the client. These courts are non-adversarial, so it is a team of people working together, hopefully toward if it's functioning correctly, the success of the client. And the team consists of the judge, the prosecutor, the court coordinator, which is someone that's employed by the Office of the Chief Judge, who makes sure that national standards are being followed. And then in mental health court in Cook County, we use the services of NAMI, which has been mentioned. And I know that email provided some information from them as well. And then there are regular status hearings. So in the beginning, the person is coming to court every week to every 2 weeks. They're meeting with a probation officer every week. They're talking with a case manager regularly, and they're supposed to be following treatment recommendations. And those treatment recommendations come from a mental health and substance use assessment that they're required to take. The demographic of these spaces is people that are high risk, high need. And so when we say that, it means not that they engage in risky behavior, but that they are high risk to reoffend, and they need a lot of treatment in order to break that cycle of reoffending. And so these things are based on just basic psychology, incentive sanctions, treatment adjustments to encourage people to keep doing what you want them to do, discourage the things that you don't want them to do. And then when they successfully complete the program, even though it is a plea and it is a conviction initially, upon successful completion, they graduate from the program, the conviction is vacated, the case is dismissed, and now we are actually expunging cases from people's records. So that case is then expunged. There is a referral process, which I don't think I have time to get into, but essentially, it can really come from anyone is what I really wanted to mention. We've had people probably like Chris who have contacted the state's attorney's office and let them know, look, CPD interacted with this person, clearly something going on with their mental health. I hope that they're considered for mental health. That gets the ball rolling. The judges can do it, the state's attorneys, the defense attorneys, anyone can get the ball rolling on this, but the person does have to be a high risk, high need. They have to be willing to plead guilty. If there are fitness issues, obviously that would prevent someone because they can't enter a plea. So sometimes there is kind of like a Goldilocks effect where someone can be too severely mentally ill to be eligible for this space because either they're not fit or we are limited. These courts are limited by the resources in the community, just like every other part of who's spoken today. And so if someone really needs to be in not like a long-term care facility, like a specialized mental health facility or a specialized nursing facility, but they need to be in like a long-term hospital setting, that is very difficult, because that's really to get someone in a forensic hospital bed, long-term hospital bed, you would have to have them be found unfit or found not guilty by reason of insanity. This court cannot get them into a forensic bed, state forensic bed, say at Elgin or Chester, through the Illinois Department of Human Services, just by nature of the person being in this court. So we are limited by the resources in the community, and the hope is to keep people in the community. But the person has to be willing to follow the treatment recommendations. Those treatment recommendations can be inpatient, especially as it relates to substance use disorders, and mental health. We do make referrals a lot to, like I said, SMRFs and SNFs. They have to be willing to plead guilty. So if they want to fight their case, if they want to run a motion, this isn't an appropriate space for them. And then if they violate, it's a violation of probation. And just like any violation of probation, someone is entitled to a hearing on that. They have due process rights with respect to that allegation. But if they're found to have been in violation of the probation can be extended, conditions can be added, or worst case scenario, the person can be resentenced within the sentencing range on the offense that they pled guilty to. So I could go on and on about eligibility, the referral process, but I think I'm running out of time. So I
That was very, it was very informative.
I just want to add, if anyone has more specific questions about that kind of stuff, I'm happy to answer or give out my information to help people get through the referral process, the screening process. And I would just mention too that there are statutes that for each one of these treatment courts that lay out eligibility. So there's one for the drug treatment court, mental health court, veterans treatment court. There's an act that relates to each of these. So
Ms. Lappin, is there a resource that summarizes each of these courts and the parameters?
My office internally keeps that information.
Okay.
But I know that just like the Cook County Circuit Court, and they have, if you were to just Google it, the information pulls up about it. It's not going to be as detailed as the things that I talked about today,
Right.
but each one of these courts, the Cook County Circuit Court maintains information on their website about it.
So I'm going to ask everyone to put contact if they want to be contacted in the chat. And I'd like to open it up. Carlene, can you do the next slide? And I'd like to open it up to questions. Right. So I think this is the last slide is the Hinda slide. And that's where Hinda comes in. We visit people once they're incarcerated, detained, and then we help them on reentry. So I think we've done a full cycle here, and it's been really amazing to hear a lot of the things that have been happening at all levels to work with mental health. I think there's been a real pivot within our systems, at least since I've been here. I think that's the last slide. I'd like to close the slides, Carlene, and open it up to questions. If you have a question, could you raise your hand? And I'd love to hear opinions also. Are there better solutions?
Abby,
Are there other things?
Abby, there's a question in the chat. Mike was asking, and I
Oh,
believe.
yeah, I saw it. I saw
Okay.
it. I'm going to start with, let me just see Mike's question. Mike is asking, Mike, if you want to ask your question, you can, and then we'll have Mark ask a question. Anybody else? Rahmil, you had a question too. So if you could, we're ready at 8 o'clock. How long do we have, Aviva?
We can go till 8:30.
Okay, so, but let's limit our questions to give everybody a chance, but it's wonderful to see interest. So Mike, do you want to start?
Yeah, he needs to be.
You want me to read it? You want to be unmuted? Let's see if we can unmute you.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. I'm sorry I'm late, but it sounds like an amazing presentation. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Levin. The question is, do you often encounter cultural resistance to these diversionary programs where they're dismissed as kind of social work, not in step with the historically vindictive punitive nature of criminal justice? And follow up, to what extent does this have a negative impact on support for wraparound services?
So it's it's a loaded and broad question, and kind of difficult internally in my office even. And we are people that are compassionate and empathetic and care about people. That's why we do this work. Even internally, people dismiss this kind of work as, oh, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a social worker, and that's ridiculous, because the advocacy that attorneys do in this space is extremely important toward the outcome of people's cases. And like I mentioned, mental health just impacts people's cases at every step. And you just have to be really thoughtful and careful, like I said at the outset, about when and why you bring it up. You have to really know who you're speaking to, because it's true. Some judges, I mean, they, just like we have CLEs here, and they obviously have ongoing educational requirements, and a lot of judges are, becoming more and more aware of these issues and are interested and care about these things. But you have to know who you're in front of and whether or not it's going to be persuasive. Some people might take it as aggravating. Oh, this person has a mental health issue, and it's not stable. Well, then I don't want to release them, because then what are they going to do after that? Or, the data shows us that when someone suffers from a substance use disorder, their likelihood of overdosing increases when they've been taken into custody. But there's this natural pull to protect people, even though that's not what the law says. Take them into custody to protect people. But there's a natural pull, because people want to do the right thing. People care about other people, and they don't want someone to feel responsible for some extremely negative outcome for someone. And so, yes, it can be difficult. People can be dismissed who care about this kind of work. But there are a lot of judges, a lot of attorneys that are believers in these diversion courts, in these spaces, and how there's actually, I've heard Chief Judge Evans speak on how problem-solving court judges, actually it influences how they sentence people on their regular court calls. And in the state's attorney's office, there's a unit for this alternative prosecution. In my office, we're creating a unit right now. I just became a supervisor in June. Prior to that, I was working in the problem-solving courts at 26 in California. And I've worked in traditional felony trial courtrooms, and it is an entirely different space to be in. But the reason I brought that up is because our office, I was hired to be a supervisor of what will be a division that's dedicated to this work.
Wow.
I hope that
Thank
it's
you.
a very long-winded answer to your question.
No, but it's very impressive to hear the work that's being done. Thank you very much. And it shows that everyone is working towards solutions, which is wonderful. Professor Buslick.
Very quickly, Ms. Lappin, please write down today's date and time, because the police department and the public defender's office are on the same page. It may never have happened before. And
Sorry, Mark, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, that's okay. I just want to validate the efficacy of all of those efforts and what the police department is trying to do on our side of the equation in furtherance of it. And all kidding aside, it is very important to understand that we are working towards the same goals: public safety.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I'm also very impressed with the work that the police are initiating, which wasn't there when I first came to Chicago. So
No.
I'm just really amazed. Mark's also on our board at HINDA, so I'm always amazed with him. I'm going to go to Rachmiel, who's also part of Hinda, and then I'm going to go to Helene Berger. I do see you. Go ahead, Rachmiel.
So first, an acknowledgement. My name is Rachmiel Chaim Drizin. I am the chair of the Legal Advisory Council for Hinda. I actually wrote to the Rabbi Shimon before him, to mention that where are we holding right now? Amazingly, tonight begins the 25th day of Elul. According to our system, today is the beginning of creation. Today at sundown, God said, God created the heavens and the earth. And what a wonderful, optimistic beginning we've done to the beginning of the world. The sixth day of creation is the beginning of Adam, creation of humankind. But right now, here, as Mark said, we're all on the same page. And what an optimistic way to begin the year. I want to thank Kyle, who didn't know me. I was the public defender for 30 years. And I will tell you that 95% of the things that came out of her mouth, I had no idea what she was talking about, which is beautiful because we're living in a world in which taking care of people who have mental issues is a big deal. And I did cases with that, but with the specialized courtrooms is important. I've worked with Mark, I've heard Chris, and I've met Mark for the first time. So I think it's important to think about where we're going to and how we can hold together. So I've got a very optimistic question. I'm going to ask first Kyle, then Mark Boslick, and then Chris Rodriguez, Sergeant Rodriguez, and then Mark Epstein. If you could be one thing you'd like to change in the system, just one specifically, to make this a better place, to make Cook County a better place, just one change, systemic change, what would that be? I'd like to hear that now so we can leave that. Just something short, please. Kyle first. One big change.
It's outside of anyone here. It would be the resources, that there be more resources for people that need long-term hospitalizations, because we see a revolving door of people with severe psychiatric issues going in and out of hospitals. They're stabilized because they get to their baseline. We don't have the resources in mental health court to help them. And so then our hands are tied, and we kind of, it makes it very difficult on the criminal case, and also it makes it hard to help the person. So the resources.
Thank you. Mark, Professor Boslick, please.
I would say following along those lines, the additional staffing for the, in our case, the docs team, but more generically, the role of mental health resource officer in order to facilitate that longer term support for those in crisis. And that's a matter of staffing, having the bodies to be able to do that.
Excellent. Sergeant Rodriguez, please, you need to be unmuted by the host. Thank you.
No, yeah.
One change.
Resources. I think that was hit right on the head. Prior to making sergeant, I worked directly with docs teams, making those phone calls, and it is heartbreaking to hear somebody reach out for help in dealing with their loved one who needs those resources, and know that in their particular case, because the family member that they have in crisis is violent, and we know that arrest isn't going to solve the problem, that there are just no resources for them, and ultimately the solution just ends up being a writ, baseline, release, and then writ all over again. So yeah.
Beautiful. Mark, you're a civil lawyer. Thanks for joining us. We're very happy that you came to join us here. Very happy. What would you, if you got one wish to see a change, systemic change, what would you like to see, please?
Yeah, I'd like to see a change in how healthcare and mental health care is financed in a particular area. So what I see a lot is that there's a lot of a revolving door. Someone does a
No.
writ of detention. This is all in the civil area before you get into the criminal. Get someone to the hospital. What often happens is, well, maybe the person will be seriously ill enough that the hospital would admit, but the way the healthcare is financed, no matter whether they need to or not, they'll be released oftentimes within a week. Okay, because there's no real funding, forensic funding on the civil side for the psychiatrist and the treatment team to get and stay engaged. You need a certain number of weeks to be able to the psychiatrist and the team to be willing to go through a civil commitment proceeding and then through a proceeding for, if necessary, involuntary medication. That, you're talking about really what takes about, 2 months at least
Mhm.
in a hospital to turn that situation around. And I think a lot of the doctors, lots of hospitals know how to do it, but insurance doesn't recognize that. They don't really get paid for that part of the system. It's easier to, sort of, cherry pick patients and not getting. I usually say if I've got a competent and engaged family member and a competent and engaged psychiatrist, there's something I can do. But on the civil level in particular, there's not enough incentive to keep the psychiatrist and the treatment team engaged to do what the facts would dictate they can do.
Yeah.
That's a part I would change. A lot of this changed over a couple of decades because I've been in this area for a long time. It used to be that most mental health was at public mental health hospitals, but then in order to take advantage of Medicaid and things like that, it changed into the private hospitals. So most of what's going on now is going on at private hospitals, and private hospitals have a bottom line that they, as do public hospitals, but in particular, they have a bottom line that they have to abide by and to engage with a civil commitment process and with medication hearings. There's just no incentive to do it. So that's what I would change.
Thank you. And
Change
thanks
how
also.
that whole process is financed.
Thank you. And thanks also to Aviva for sponsoring this. People get CLEs here. Thank you so much. Avi, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachmiel. It was a beautiful question and really insightful. I think all of us are agreeing that we need more mental health resources because that will give us options in the court, options pre, and options for the police, but they aren't out there. So our choices, and that's also the problem that Hinda deals with. One time I spent 4 weeks on the phone just trying to find somebody a bed with all my caseworkers. So it's not easy. We have Helene Berger. Did I pronounce that right? Oh, let's unmute you. Helene, let's see. Aviva, oh, there we are.
Hi. Just lowering my hand here. Hi, everybody. I'm a retired judge mediator, and I just went to this program because I thought it was interesting. And speaking of resources, I worked a long time ago on a program for juvenile court, and I understood that DOJ funded task treatment, the drug people, to assist in some of these programs. And I just was wondering, speaking of resources, have some of these cuts that have come around at the federal level impacted the ability of these courts to function if they cut the funding for task, and any other funding that was being provided to assist?
That is a huge concern. It's an ongoing concern. It's mostly affecting like people's, so I don't exactly deal with the funding. Obviously, I've learned a little bit about it, but the court coordinator who works for the Office of the Chief Judge is dealing with funding people's services. And the probation department also has some funds. Then there are also funds through grants. We don't use task for any case management anymore, and I won't get into those details, but I'm very happy that we don't use task anymore. So yeah, that's a concern. We've seen it happen. We've seen it affect people, and it is things like the examples I can think of are like someone staying in residential treatment and where they maybe would have had funding to stay there for 90 days. Now they're only funded through 30 days or something like that. But how that funding works, that's more, I can get you in touch with people that know more about that and how it's being
I w-
affected.
it was just a curiosity because when resources are, I mean, I'm familiar with them and I just know that, you know, you're all talking about resources and the more money you can get from the feds to assist, be it for the police department, for the court system, for a specialized program, the easier it is for the program to do good work.
Yeah, and it definitely is affecting like what treatment people can be aligned with, where they can be aligned with that treatment, if it can be inpatient or if they're forced to be outpatient. It's affecting those things.
Thanks. I was just curious.
Are there any more questions? We're at 8:22, but I think we have time for one more, or maybe even two short questions. I've just been really impressed with all the fight that everybody's doing on every level to deal with mental health crisis in Illinois. And I do believe it's a crisis because of the lack of resources. But your awareness, all of our awareness and talking together as teams through the cycle is part of the way we can advocate and come to problem-based solutions. So I really appreciate your time, and really it's very important for our families to hear some of these options because they've often been suffering for many years dealing with these issues. So I just want to say that we really appreciate and the collaboration of the Decalogue Society in supporting the HINDA and its activities, the HINDA Institute. I'm also going to put my contact number in because you may have some clients that could benefit from our services. And Aviva, do you have an evaluation you're going to share?
Yes, I do. I just was going to wait until we were finished and then put it up. I don't
Are
want
there any other questions? Last few questions. Don't be shy. There's a lot of information. So I'm just wondering if there's a way, maybe I'll take some opportunity, Aviva. Since we recorded it, maybe we could do a page that summarizes some of these options and send it out to those that are interested. That might be valuable.
That would be a great idea. Well, I also want to thank everybody here for attending. I'm going to stop the recording now and then put up the evaluation and ask you to stay on, please, to complete it. And thank you again, Abby and the entire HINDA Institute for bringing such good programming to us.
Yeah, your services are critical to us.